All right, team, welcome back to the ManTalks show. Today we're going to do a little bit of a departure from what we've been talking about the last few weeks. We are going to talk about the three feminine archetypes that most men are unconsciously drawn to, or maybe are consciously looking for. And these three feminine archetypes, as far as I can tell, are what most men are looking for when they're looking for a long-term partner, when they're looking for a wife. It's some combination of these three things. Now, what can get challenging is when a man has some type of wound with the feminine or wound with women, right, with his mother, etc., which we'll talk about as we go along. So here is the first one. So the first one is the Madonna. And the Madonna is the archetype of feminine virtue, the archetype of feminine nurturing, caring, caregiving. And in some forms, the Madonna is the sort of archetype of the mother, right, of Gaia, not in the sense of like you wanting a mother or mothering, but the essence that that mother embodies, right, nurturing, caregiving, love, virtuousness, etc., right, unconditional love. So that's part of the first thing that a lot of men are drawn to, specifically if he's a man, and again, what we're looking for is this trifecta. What most men are wanting is some trifecta of the three archetypes that I'm going to share. What can happen is that a lot of men will get caught. Let's just say you had a mother who was absent, or you had a mother who was hypercritical, or maybe abusive in some capacity. Those men that have grown up in that household might look for a woman who is of the Madonna archetype fully, right? So she doesn't have these other two archetypes that I'm about to talk about. She just is really the embodiment of it. And this is where a lot of guys get into trouble, because they don't bring their sexual energy to that person. They might feel nurtured and caretaken by them. And maybe you found yourself in this type of relationship with a woman where she's so wonderful, she's so nice, she's so nurturing and caring, but you don't like really allow your full sexual desires to come out. So you feel deeply in love and enamored with her. And maybe you keep attracting women that are like this, but you can't seem to move past a certain phase, right? Maybe you don't want to fully commit to them. You don't want to get engaged with them. You don't want to get married to them or have kids with them. And because there's something that seems to be missing. So the Madonna archetype is the first one. It's generally what a lot of men can find themselves drawn to, because sometimes it can be mixed with like that innocence, the sense of, in the Christian sense, like the purity of it. But the Madonna really embodies this kind of feminine virtue, right? This feminine virtue. The next is the archetype, and some of you aren't going to like this language, but the next is the archetype of the whore, right? So the Madonna Horror. And the whore is the feminine expression of freedom, right? Connected to her own darkness, connected to her own sense of almost like reckless abandonment. There's a quality of sexual potency that's there. There's a quality of expression and aliveness within her own sexual body that she's not afraid of or disconnected from her own sexual wants or desires. She's open to receiving in whatever capacity that might look like. And she's very deeply connected to seeing the value of the masculine, wanting it, craving it, desiring it. So where a lot of men get caught is that they fall in love, they become enamored with a woman that kind of embodies, and I've seen this, and maybe you've gone through this in your own life, where you find yourself in a relationship with a woman where the sex is crazy good, right? It's like, it's phenomenal. She's very connected to this part of herself, but she's very disconnected from the other two archetypes, right? The Madonna and the other one that we're going to discuss here in a second. And so it feels like something's missing, right? It's hard to connect and feel like you can have maybe a long-term relationship, but you feel totally enamored by the sexual connection. Or if you are dating somebody that embodies that Madonna, you're totally enamored and in love with the sort of like raw beauty of this woman who is so caring and so nurturing and has such a beautiful essence and a heart. And maybe you've even found a woman who embodies those two elements, but is sort of maybe missing the third. So what can often happen as a man is you get into a relationship with a woman, and I've seen this happen with a lot of men. There's something called the Madonna Horror complex, where a man will fall in love with a woman and he'll only view her as that Madonna. He'll only view her as this nurturing, loving, compassionate, caretaking woman, and doesn't view her as a sexual being. He doesn't bring his sexual desires to her, and he doesn't allow himself to view her as a fully sexual being. So he just focuses in on she's virtuous and she's loving and she's kind and compassionate, and he misses out on maybe invoking her darker sexual urges or desires and that sort of lust and longing within the relationship. So the last archetype is the archetype of the queen. And the archetype of the queen, there's a lot of conversation. Oh, and I should give you these. The Madonna, the Horror is basically embodied by somebody like Eve, who is the embodiment of desire. Madonna is sort of in the embodiment of Mary, right? The mother of Christ, right? This sort of very virtuous character, this feminine entity who's very loving and very kind and very supportive and very present within her son's life, but within her man's life. And then the queen is the archetype of like somebody like Sophia, the figure of wisdom, the figure of enlightenment. So there's kind of this trifecta, right? The queen sort of sitting at the top, and then the Madonna Horror making up the bottom of the pyramid. That a lot of men, when they look out into the world, and maybe you found yourself going through this path in dating where you're very attracted to a woman because she kind of embodies that more darker sexual energy or lots of sexual potency, but there isn't that same level of potency within the queen archetype within her or the Madonna archetype within her, or maybe you can't view her as that. So the queen archetype is the archetype of deep respect and reverence. So you have a reverence for that woman, and she embodies this kind of wisdom and something intangible, that there seems to be a depth within that woman that you respect. And when I say reverence, what I really mean is this sort of energy of compassion and love and a bit of admiration, that there's something that she brings to the table that is elevated, maybe beyond other women. And perhaps the queen is able to challenge you a little bit more in a healthy way, in a grounded way. So what I see a lot of men looking for and getting caught in is that they fall in love with one of these energies, right? They fall in love with the Madonna, they fall in love with the Whore, or maybe they fall in love with a woman who just represents the queen to them, right? And they miss out on these other aspects of viewing the woman that they're with through these other lenses, of seeing these other parts that their woman might embody or represent. And so for you as a man, when you are dating, when you're with your partner, starting to notice, when does she embody this Madonna? Like, where is she very caretaking and nurturing, where she's being very mindful of the space, or being very mindful of you, being very caretaking of people around her? Where does she embody the queen, where she can challenge you sometimes, or she has a tremendous amount of wisdom, or there's a reverence and a respect that you have for her? And where does she embody the Whore? Where does she embody, and I know that word has gotten a lot of like sort of negative connotations in our culture today, but I think it's also being sort of reclaimed and liberated perhaps. And maybe there's some people that are not going to like that I've used this word, but it's part of the archetypes, right? It's part of what a lot of women carry. So maybe you as a man have been enamored with different archetypes, but the aim is to start to interact with the women that you date or are with as if they have all three of these parts. To start to view, to start to see, has she developed this inner Madonna? Has she developed this inner Whore? Has she developed this queen within her? And can I honor those parts of her? Can I view those parts of her? Can I evoke and draw out those parts of her? Can I respect those parts of her? So these are the three archetypes that I have found that a lot of men are looking for. And these are the archetypes that I see a lot of men get stuck on, where they love one part of a woman and they don't see the other parts of her. And I'll just end off on a story. There's a show that came out recently that my wife, not recently, I guess it was like a year or two ago, called Sex Life. And it really just showed this woman who had become a housewife. She had two kids. She had a husband who was very successful, very good man, made good money. You know, they sort of had like the nice house, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And he treated her like the Madonna and the Queen. So he viewed her as his equal. He viewed her as somebody that he had reverence for. He viewed her as somebody that was feminine and virtuous and connected to her virtue and caring and loving. But he didn't see the other element of her. And the whole premise of this show is about how this part of her, right, what we've been calling the horror archetype, right, this part of her, this darker sexual desires from a past relationship, right? So she starts fantasizing about this guy that she had been with before, where that part of her was very front and center. This liberated sexual part, this sexually free, reckless abandonment was very front and center within this other relationship with this other man. And she starts to fantasize about him, and she writes about him, and the husband finds out, and then she's in contact with this other guy, and it's all this drama. Why do I say that? I say that because as far as I can tell, most women, and I don't mean to speak for them, but I'm sure that they'll tell me whether I'm right or wrong in the comments, or DM me and tell me, most women are wanting to embody these three archetypes. They're wanting to have some form of expression of these three archetypes because it's fulfilling and rewarding, and it's part of their essence to be nurturing and caring, to be the embodiment of feminine virtue, to be connected with their own sexual liberation and sexual freedom, and to also be the embodiment of that reverence, of that deeper feminine wisdom and sense of enlightenment. And so for you as a man to find a woman that you can see those archetypes in and to start to recognize when they're coming out can be incredibly powerful and potent for your relationship. So if you're watching this on YouTube, comment below. What stood out to you? What do you agree with? Where have you seen this show up in your own dating life? And if you're listening to this on the podcast, then fire me off a DM and let me know what you thought about this. Share this with somebody that you think would enjoy it. Man it forward. And until next week, this is Connor Beaton signing off.